gold.
He could be too far. No, he's kicking. Oh, what a catch!
Puts a spicy forehand out in front of Naomi Morcilla.
Wu for the win. Team Canada. Darren Wu!
Santos with the layout grab.
Oh, that fantastic grab. The claws of Chaffer.
Canada just became the world champions.
Yo, ultimate fans around Canada, the rest of the world. You're listening to the Huckin podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Theo Wan from Toronto, Ontario.
And I'm Danie Proby, hailing from New West, BC. We are your coast-to-coast guide to all things Canadian Ultimate. So this episode, we're going to be talking about Ultimate starting again, and we have a special guest kind of showing up in our podcast 3 times. We have Mike Haddock from Haddock Sport Performance. He not only does the main event where he talks about safe return to play and so many other tips and tricks. It's going to be amazing. He's also here for our Beaver Tales. He talks about the origin of this company that he built. And he's also in the subscriber only, where he gave us his top 8, his starting 8 of all the athletes he's ever worked with. So it gets a little spicy.
Yeah, it's a jam-packed episode. These episodes now, we're going to have more news, more and more news. And that's why we're going to jump right into it right now, into our news segment, because Club Ultimate is back, baby. Multiple tournaments happening on different sides of the country. Let's go to the news.
We now have breaking news.
So yeah, as Theo said, Club Ultimate is back. We're excited. We were initially watching some stuff happening in the States, but it's now north of the border. It's happening here in Canada. So we're going to do a little recap of some of the tournaments that have been happening. I had the pleasure of being able to watch some Ultimate in my hometown. And by hometown, I mean Surrey. It's not my hometown, but it was BC mixed tournament. There was 4 teams in the tournament. Lots of familiar faces out there. We had Red Flag playing. We had TT playing, Fable, and a pickup team called Armada, I believe. And I was like, who's Armada? And then I showed up. There's some Furious players, there's some Traffic players. They were pretty good.
Okay.
So it was a really fun tournament. And I practiced with Flag last year in the fall, but they've never actually played a real game against another team. So I was really curious to see how their roster would stack up. And they had pretty good and long points against 2 of the teams. I didn't see their game against Fable, but especially against TT, I think they're giving them a little bit of a run for their money. But Red Flag came out on top for all of their games, winning a couple of them handedly. And then I think the TT one was a little bit closer. But in general, super exciting to see lots of people cramping on the field, lots of people tweaking things. People looked fast, but the rosters were a little bit shorter by the end of the tournament. But yeah, Frisbee's back. It's exciting.
Yeah, and my question is, what was like, in terms of the quality, like, were there like a lot of like turnover heavy points, or were offenses kind of, crisp and smooth? Or because I know, as I mentioned, being from Ontario, we haven't had the privileges of practicing like you do in Vancouver, BC, the West Coast. So you've been practicing a lot more. So were offenses a little bit more crisp, would you say, than what you might expect from such a shortened preseason? Yeah,
and both TT and Flag, I think even Fable a little bit too, practiced last summer, and Flag into the fall. And so a lot of their core contingent of their roster has been practicing together kind of on and off. But yeah, no, Red Flag's roster, it's pretty exciting. It's a lot of young, hot players that are coming up to the scene. So as you would expect with a really like flashy, young, awesome team, lots of turnovers. But they would always get it back. So it was good Ultimate. But yeah, there was a lot of unforced errors, which is to be expected. But yeah, lots of big plays, lots of big skies, layout blocks. Like it was all out there. Everyone was playing like they hadn't played in a long time, and they were excited to be doing Frisbee again.
Yeah, I could just imagine that. And I'm calling it now, like Red Flag, we want to see some mixed representation at the USA Ultimate National Championships. We haven't had a Canadian team make it into the mixed division for a very long time. So our hopes, that's a lot of pressure, but our hopes are riding on Red Flag. We're hitching a ride there and hoping and hopping on the Red Flag train. So
yeah, I think with Red
big
Flag,
shout out to them.
Their tallest players are like 5'8". So we're all curious how they're going to stack up against the States because they're built different down there. And maybe Red Flag needs to pick up a couple people that are at least 5'9".
Yeah, that's the hope. Maybe we'll see if they take up some new taller players for their pickups or something. But we're gonna head over to the East Coast now, or Eastern provinces, I should say, and head over into the province of Quebec. So they had a big tournament. They have a circuit that's run by FQU, which is their provincial governing body. So I talked to Phil Dorval. So shout out to him for this information. He's the technical director for Ultimate Quebec in Quebec City. So that's really cool. 21 teams, 3 divisions, full tournament out there. He will admit this. So he said this on the record. Level of play, to be expected. Like it was okay, So Quake, he coaches Quake, the top team out of Quebec City, versus Manic. And he said in the first point, there were 3 turnovers each. And he said that was like kind of emblematic of what the tournament looked like. So a little bit of rusty play. But overall, people were just happy to be back, right? All these familiar Quebec teams out there. So just to recap the results for you if you didn't see them online. So in the women's division, Iris didn't actually officially send a team. So the 2 teams listed are, I guess it would be Siri, S-I-R-I, and Risi, R-I-S-I. And so talking to Allison Fisher, their coach, this is not Iris. It was players who have been practicing with them and who wanted to go. So just to be clear, they're having tryouts later on. But those 2 teams did finish 1 and 2, followed by Cube, which is the team out of Quebec City. So that's results for you in the women's division. In the mixed division, Epoch, which is a lot of members of a team that, Danie, I think you played against. Qold, I think is what it's called. Qold. So you played some of those players. So they actually won the mixed division. They won the Masters division in 2019. So they were able to represent Canada in mixed Masters selection. So that's pretty cool. Some other notable mixed teams were there, including Battleship and Red Fox out of Sherbrooke. And then in the open division, Phil Dorval told me Mephisto, which is now, we can officially say it. Before it was an unnamed Montreal Open team that they were talking about, but now they're going back to their roots with Mephisto. And Mephisto, he said, looked heads and above every other Open team there. They kind of just took down everyone. And that's basically made up of mostly Montreal Royale players. So they were just taking out the competition, coached by John Hayduke, who you know probably pretty well there out of BC, who's now living in Montreal. So that's sort of the recap for that. I'm just excited. I know I talked a little bit about this tournament, but I'm just excited that Ultimate's back, that we can talk about it on the podcast. So that's your recap from that Quebec tournament. I wouldn't read too much into these results, to be honest. It's just good that club teams are back out there and playing. And I would probably say the same for the mixed as well. Like, it's just good for the teams to be back playing. So one more tournament to talk about, Danie.
Yeah, and before I even jump into that tournament, I like that the 2 names of the teams from Iris are just Iris spelt differently. It's clever.
Yeah.
At first I was like, that's weird. I was like, oh, I'm clever. Okay. So
Or they're clever.
They're clever, but I'm clever for figuring it out. Come on, give me some credit.
It's true.
Okay.
It's true.
Heading even more east, we're going to Newfoundland and Labrador, and there was a 16-team beach tournament that happened in Salmon Cove. So according to Nick House, who was on the pod, featured a little while ago, there's 205 players that were activated during that tournament, which is awesome. And we're going to be seeing more of these tournaments kind of popping up. And if you want them to be featured, you want us to give recaps and shout outs to specific plays, specific players, teams that are doing really, really well, please reach out to us. You can message us, email us. We think we have a pretty good pulse on what's going on, but if we're missing stuff, like, we want to know about it, and we're very friendly. So reach out to us. I know that there's actually a tournament coming up this next weekend, which I'm excited to talk about on the next pod, because it will have actually happened by the time this episode. No, it will be happening for the next episode rather, and it's a juniors tournament. So we actually have our youth in BC are going to be out playing. There's, I believe, 15 in the open division, or maybe 9 in the open division, and 6 in the women's division. And I'm really excited. I'm coaching a team. There's grade 6s on the team, and they're playing against grade 12s. It's going to be amazing. So I'm excited to see some juniors ultimate happening soon too.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And yeah, the group chats are buzzing with news. We do appreciate that. So if you're a club team for some reason, maybe you're a new club team or something happened and you're not in the group chats, send us a message on Instagram or email hucking@ultiworld.com, and we'll take care of that. But we're talking return to play, so we're going to jump into our main event with Mike Haddock of Haddock Sport Performance. Before we do that, we're just going to hear from our sponsor, Be Ultimate, and check us out. Matching Sun hoodies, let's go. We're official now here on the podcast. We're just excited about, we'll pop the hoods on here. Shout out to Be Ultimate, our sponsor for this episode. We're looking fresh. Let's go. This episode is brought to you by Be Ultimate Apparel. Based out of Vancouver, BC, Be Ultimate is climate neutral certified and designs products that are built to perform. I personally love my 2 Sun hoodies from them, and I rock them wherever I go. If you want to learn more about Be Ultimate, or if you're a club team captain and want to take advantage of their no strings attached offer for a free jersey, head over to beultimate.ca or visit the link in the show description.
Hey, this is Gavin Gray of Halifax Anchor and Brunch Money, and you're listening to the Huckin podcast, your coast-to-coast guide for all things Canadian Ultimate.
All right, welcome back, everybody. We are at the main event now. We are so honored and excited to have Mike Haddock here with us. Mike Haddock is a Team Canada strength and conditioning coach. He's been working with the Sixers and GOAT, and he owns Haddock Sport Performance, trains lots of athletes that I know, even remotely in Vancouver. So we're really honored to have you, Mike. And maybe if you could expand a little bit on your resume for our audience so they can get to know you a little bit better.
Sure, I'd love to. Well, first, thank you so much for having me here today. This is really exciting. I reached out to you, Danie. I've been listening to the Huckin podcast and really enjoyed it. And I just, sent you a quick props that I was like, this is great content. And so I'm actually super excited to be here with you. A little bit about myself. I'll try to do the quick summary. Working backwards in time, I was the strength conditioning coach for Team Canada Men and Team Canada Women. In the lead up to the canceled WGC tournament, 2020-2021. In 2019, I was working with the Toronto Sixers, very fortunate to come home with a silver medal from USA Nationals. 2018, traveled down to World Club Championships with GOAT, and we came away with a bronze. And for anyone who's seen, video, that was just an absolute wild tournament, finishing the tournament in the Dome, basically playing speed point. It was wonderful. It was crazy. It was exciting. And then before that, 2017, traveling to Poland with the World Games team and coming home with a bronze. So I've been fortunate to work with many different teams, many different athletes across Canada. And as you noted within HSP, just a development and growth across the entire Ultimate community and working with athletes all around the world.
Amazing. Pretty good resume, I think.
I've had some fun along the way.
All right, so Mike, first question for you. Obviously, we're coming off a long layoff with the pandemic and things like that for Ultimate. So can you talk about what the pandemic changed for you with yourself personally and then with HSP as well?
Yeah, it's been an interesting year for everyone. It's affected me just as much as any of the athletes or fans of the game. When the pandemic hit, I was running HSP full time from home, loving it, but it was certainly busy. It was stressful. But one of the, let's say, pros with the cons of this last year was when everything kind of ended, I kind of stepped away from the really heavy business side. I was just ready for my own little break. And so it took a couple months to recover and recharge. And this past fall in November, there was actually a really unique opportunity that I came across at the school called Haverhill College. And I actually got a new full-time job in November. And I wasn't expecting it. I wasn't anticipating applying for this job, but, the stars aligned and I recognized what an opportunity it was. And so I started this role while still running HSP full-time. And so over the last 6 months, one of the biggest challenges and changes for me was realizing I can't have 2 full-time jobs, and I'm going to have to start making decisions about where I want to focus and what's most important for me. And so in the early months, November, December, January, I was forced to kind of sit back and reflect about what I wanted HSP to be and where I wanted it to go and where I was going to be able and willing to spend my time. And one of the fortunate parts of the last couple of years, HSP has continued to grow, and the brand has increased in recognition and awareness, and my infrastructure has continued to develop, and I've been able to take on more teams, more organizations, and more athletes. which was wonderful. But then I quickly realized that as I continued to take on more and more, there were going to be teams and organizations that I just wasn't as enthusiastic about or wasn't within the sport of ultimate. And so when I started this new job, I realized like what makes me most excited about HSP was what I did originally, which was supporting Team Canada Ultimate Athletes and our Canadian athlete system. And so over the last couple of months, I've started to streamline back, and I've stepped away from a couple different groups and teams that I kind of felt like I'd reached the end of the road with. And I've been able to refocus back on our Canadian team system. And so that was, a wonderful opportunity with both the Open and Women's Team WGC, and really unfortunate, obviously, that the tournament didn't happen. But over the last couple of months, I was able to commit some time to the Toronto Elites program, which is our local junior system. I'm starting up with UBC Men's, which I don't think is a secret anymore. That's official. And, there's a couple feelers out to some East teams. And one of the bigger initiatives, which, we can break into later, was working with Ultimate Canada's Data and Analytics Working Group to really try to take a step forward within ultimate sports science and to provide some objective understanding of the sport within our traditionally sort of subjective expertise or awareness.
That's a lot. I can empathize with overpacking your schedule and realizing, oh my gosh, I am doing too many things at not the degree of competency that I would like. I totally feel that. So it's good for you for making those decisions about the things that bring you the most joy and fill your cup the most. I know a lot of athletes that you're working with, and they really love your programming. So hopefully I can work with you at some point in the future.
Hey.
Speaking of working with athletes and training, I know a lot of ultimate players are starting to take lifting and training more seriously. It's definitely a more current thing. Like even a decade ago, it looked completely different in terms of what people know and how they are expected to be training on club teams. And I think a lot of people make a lot of common mistakes. And is there some that you've realized that people are making a little bit more often with regards to returning to play or just training in general? Just, some common errors that you see.
Absolutely. Well, I think you really nailed, you hit the nail on the head, that really the idea of strength and conditioning, the concept of strength and conditioning in ultimate has rapidly evolved over the last 5 years. And I think ultimate athletes have always been very active, but haven't necessarily taken that step from, working out to training. And I think that is a very distinct step just in terms of planning and execution and long-term thought process. But I think, when you speak about some of the common mistakes, we're talking about the paths and the steps towards that performance success. And, for me, I think it's really important to clearly outline, like, what does it mean to be successful in ultimate? What are the components on field that lead to that long-term success? And I think for, the audience who are listening, you start to picture the sport, picture yourself in it or watching it. Like, we can see those powerful moments, the big skies, being fast, being explosive on that first step. We recognize that conditioning plays a big role. Agility plays a big role. And so we tend to focus so heavily on those high performance pieces. However, I think if we were to only look at a single game and recognize those performance elements, that's one piece of the puzzle. But the nature of ultimate is you don't just play one game. You play usually 6 to 8 games over the course of a weekend. And it's the volume within our sport that is the largest risk factor. That's where the red flag is for many athletes. And so many athletes are powerful, they're fast, they're agile, they're conditioned, but they can't maintain that over a weekend, let alone a season, because there potentially is an absence of strength, stability, mobility, or ability to withstand that impact and that stress over a long period of time. So I think for many of our athletes, the injuries come from breaking down while working through the course of their season. So I think most athletes recognize, what the common injuries are. We talk about rolling an ankle, pulling a hamstring, a calf, a groin, etc., cranky knees, or unfortunately, worst case scenario, like significant knee injuries. We know the vast majority of those injuries happen in the lower half of the body. And so when we're building programming, like when we start to now talk about what those mistakes are, athletes not being able to fill each of those necessary buckets, that they do need power and speed and agility and conditioning, but they need to be stable. They need to be prerequisitely strong. They need to be able to get into positions and angles, or they're not going to get injured. Like if you step out for a big flick and you pull your groin, that's the same problem as if you pulled your hammy while you're sprinting or if you twisted an ankle on a bad step. So, we have to be resilient to all these different types of injuries. And so the big issues that we see within the sport are like kind of the big one is athletes don't really have a plan. They're kind of guessing, or they do something different every session. And if you're just throwing darts at the board, you don't really know why you're successful or why you're not successful. And so having a plan, even if you're taking some time to research or talk to an expert or professional, like having a concrete plan, that in itself is an experiment. I'm going to do this for 4 or 6 or 8 weeks or sessions, and I'm going to try to build A, B, and C qualities. And at the end of this, I expect to be better at this, this, and that. So having a plan is a really important piece of that puzzle. And that really does bridge the gap between, just working out, we'll say kind of casually, or really working on a training program that is specifically designed to get you better at the sport. So I'd say that's mistake number one.
Yeah, Mike, I guess I saw a stat. I don't know if it was an AUDL thing or something else, but a lot of the more devastating injuries are usually in game 7 or even game 8 into a tournament. Do you think that coming off of a pandemic and coming off of such a long period of time off, do you expect that maybe you'll see a similar trend, or do you think it'll be earlier on? Or if you were to predict, what would you think would be happening with regards to injuries coming back?
I mean, it's such an unfortunate scenario, but I am very nervous about both the incidence and significance of injuries that we're going to see in the 2021 season. And, I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm very wrong, that I'm embarrassed to go back and watch this podcast, but I don't think I will be. And unfortunately, in already communicating with athletes and teams and starting to get an idea of what's happening in the sport, we are hearing about, small twinges and tweaks. We're hearing about some injuries that are already happening. It's really tough to come back to such a high intensity sport after a really long period of time. When you really consider, under a normal kind of club system, most of our athletes haven't competed at their highest level in close to 2 years. And that's a lifetime in sport. And for all of us who lived through a pandemic, there's a variety of responses. There are athletes who leaned into their training because it was something they really appreciated and enjoyed, and it gave them structure to their week. And there were athletes who didn't do very much. And that's completely fair. That's just where they were in their sort of personal decisions. And for the athletes that haven't been very active and potentially haven't even gone through their normal off-season routine, coming back to the sport of ultimate is going to be even more difficult, because we forget what the sport asks of us, just to accelerate and decelerate and to jump and to be agile and to do it over and over again in just a single practice, let alone 2 or 3 practices a week. It's a big ask. And so I do believe that, it means we have to be strategic. We have to be really thoughtful, but I really hope, I hope I'm wrong, but I do think we're going to start to see strains and sprains and potentially some bigger injuries along the way.
Yikes. Hopefully not.
Yeah, and related to that there, Mike, we're thinking, as we talked about in the news segment, tournaments happening and things like that, with Ultimate coming back. So let's talk about warm-up a bit, because even just the concept of warming up, if you've been on an Ultimate field, when it first started, you might have seen someone just start with A, Bs, and Cs. That was always the common warm-up. Mike, you probably know this. Like, people will just come out and do A, Bs, and Cs. And we know now that's not probably the way to go in terms of warming up. You want to kind of build towards it. So talk about some warm-up essentials for players and organizations listening that can definitely benefit their athletes there.
Sure. Yeah. My philosophical approach to warm up is kind of what you just talked about, is the idea of preparing the athlete for the demands of the day. whether that's on field or in the gym. And so my philosophy is this idea of taking someone from essentially 0 to 100 on kind of a readiness scale. And so when an athlete arrives at a session, again, whether it's on the field or at the gym, they're traditionally sort of carrying the baggage of their day, right? There's life stress, whether it's school and work and other things happening in their lives. So as they arrive, they're still almost focused on, the other pieces of their life. And so when we start our proper session, like once we get into our first exercise or into our first drill, we need them to be prepared. We need them to be both physically and mentally engaged. And so the warm-up is bridging the gap from the moment they get out of their car to the moment they start their first exercise. And so if it's in the gym, traditionally your first exercise is either your highest priority, highest power, or highest complexity exercise. It's the one that you really need to bring your full attention and energy to. And so if you're not at 100% readiness, you're either not getting full value on that exercise, or you might have a little bit of risk to that exercise. And the same thing applies to the field. You get into your drill, or whether it's mini or getting into the first game, playing your first point, you have to be ready. And so there is a very distinct process from that 0 to 100. So, I sort of view it as kind of 3 or 4 primary steps to go from 0 to 100. And just to start providing a few examples, the first piece for my athletes is tissue prep and temperature increase. So some athletes like to do some stretching and rolling. That's perfectly okay. It's a little bit more self-driven. They're going to figure out what areas need a little bit more attention. But then everyone will jump into a temperature increase. So, 3 to 5 minutes, whether it's jogging or biking or a step mill or whatever it happens to be, again, gym or field. The goal is to begin that process of getting the body warm. So they're breathing heavier. Obviously the cardiovascular system's starting to engage. The muscles are starting to warm up. And most importantly, they're starting to get their head involved. They're starting to think about their session and start to become more focused. So that's always kind of that first big chunk of the session. And then sort of that second and third piece, sometimes combined together, is what I loosely term kind of mobility and movement. And essentially what we're looking at is preparing each of the individual pieces for, again, that session. So preparing the torso, so making sure that the abdominal muscles are on. Then we're going to make sure that the hip muscles are engaged. We're going to make sure that the knee is stable, that they're comfortable on a single leg. We're going to make sure that some of their tight spots are being addressed. So maybe it's a greatest stretch or a deep squat. They're just making sure that their primary challenges are being addressed, that they're prepared. And then we take that a step further and we start to move into more complex or dynamic movements. So, squats and lunges and lateral actions and things like that. And so you can kind of see it slowly starts to build. It becomes a little bit more advanced, again, a little bit more kind of energy driven. And then the last piece of the puzzle is kind of the intensity build. And that's where, you referenced running mechanics. A's and B's will certainly come into play. You're definitely going to want to be playing with some high intensity action. So jumping and sprinting. You want to jump, you want to land, you want to bounce, and you want to be doing some sprinting to make sure you're kind of revving up to that 100th kind of percent of readiness. Because very likely if you're out in the field, you're going to need to sprint pretty much in that first drill, and you got to be ready for it.
Yeah, I've seen some gnarly warm-ups in my day where it's just like, well, when I first started playing, it was no warm-up, which was worse, obviously. So it just seems like everybody has a different philosophy. So I really appreciate how you kind of broke it into like phases, and you didn't tell us specifically what exercises or whatever, because it's about, increasing your temperature, like all of that. That makes a lot of sense. And that's easy to kind of navigate depending upon your needs of the tournament or the practice, whatever you're working on. So I love that description. Now, something that I've personally struggled with is in my off season, I'll gym train and I'll be doing like my field workouts and all of that stuff. But as soon as the season starts, I somehow lose any ability to create my own schedule. How do you fit in a gym or a lift day into a season? Once you're practicing, maybe you're not into tournaments yet, but like, how do you stack it? Say you're wanting to gym 2 to 3 times a week. What would you suggest?
Oh, that's an excellent question. And yeah, something that many athletes are trying to balance right now, trying to figure out, potentially how do I make up for lost time, or how do I complement my on-field work, most appropriately? So I think there's a couple of questions. There's 2 primary questions that we need to ask. So the first is, what is the purpose of getting into the gym? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? And is it that you're trying to make up for lost time? Like, if, for everything that we lived through in the last year and a half, is it you're like, oh, I knew that I should have done some things in the winter. I'm going to do it all right now. That might not be the most complimentary or positive sort of step into that process. If you're going into the gym to complement your field work and you're like, okay, I'm just trying to shore up some of these weak links, I'm trying to kind of bump up this quality or that quality, I think there can be a very positive way to incorporate it. I'll talk about some more details in a moment, but the second big question to ask is, what can you recover from? Because now that field sessions have started, like most of the time, the team that you're on or the team that you're trying out for is dictating how many times you're on the field and when that's happening. So if they're telling you it's 3 sessions a week, you have no control of that. And if you haven't necessarily been training or you're not as physically prepared as you might normally be, 3 sessions a week on the field might be way more than you're accustomed to, and that might be more than enough. And so the idea of adding in other sessions, it might be too much for you, and it could actually be a negative by trying to add in a positive. And so if you're, playing with a team where the demands are 1 time per week, you can recover from 1 session a week probably quite well. And then you have available time to be like, okay, well, now I can add in these 2 gym sessions, or I can do an extra field session on my own and a gym session on my own. And there's a little bit more flexibility to that. And so I think, honestly, the recovery question is the most important piece of the puzzle. If you're able to bounce back really well from your field work and you're finding it takes 24 to 48 hours for you to kind of feel like yourself again, then you can sort of aim for 3 or 4 sessions total in a week. And if 2 of that is with your team, and that means 2 more on your own, or 3 with your team and 1 on your own, that could be a nice balance. But if you're finding it takes 2 or 3 or 4 days to recover from your field work, just the math of the week is you might not be able to fit anything else in. And probably listening to your body is the best strategy, the best solution. And if you're trying to make up for lost time, you might actually be setting yourself back a little bit further.
So you might actually be potentially losing yourself more time there, Mike, because you get hurt and then it's like you're losing more. So you got to be careful with it. And that's why we really appreciate you coming on and talking about this. And speaking of injuries, you mentioned earlier hearing already some anecdotal stories of people getting hurt. So I'm just thinking of people who, I know people personally who've torn ACLs are coming back, right? Or maybe they've just given up on the sport, but maybe they want to come back one day. And so how do you come back from an injury, both physically, but also the mental aspect? Like if you tore your ACL jumping, next time you go for that big sky, you might be hesitant to even attempt it. So can you talk about it from those 2 angles there?
For sure. I think my professional expertise, sort of what I'm qualified to really talk about, is the physical side, and recognizing that there is a relationship between the very early stage rehab, the physiotherapy, the chiropractic, the sport doctor side, and how that blends into S&C. But you speak about the mental side, and I'm certainly not a sports psychologist by any means, but kind of working with athletes who've lived through injuries, either during our time together or part of that reason that they've reached out to HSPs, the mental side, the emotional side is almost a bigger hurdle than the physical side. On the physical sphere, depending on what the injury is, there's usually a pretty clear-cut guideline of like, you must hit this to go to this level, and then you go to here, and then here, and then here. And you almost have these really nice goalposts for each phase of your rehabilitation. And so, working with a physio or a chiro or a sport doctor, they're going to help guide you through those early weeks and months. You're going to have that support. You're going to have that partnership. And that's going to play a really big role. But the mental side, I think many athletes struggle with this. I don't think it's talked about very often. And I think from that mental emotional standpoint, it's important to realize that there's almost 2 phases to the return to play. There's the how you feel while going through the recovery, and then how you feel once you get back on the field. And so during your recovery, athletes have spoken about the sense of isolation, obviously like kind of fear of missing out. Your teammates are competing and they're going and having fun together. They're traveling and they're doing all these fun things that, you really appreciate and you want to be a part of. And There are athletes who struggle sometimes with like the identity side. Like they really kind of view themselves as athletes. And when they have a significant injury and they're away from the sport for 6, 8, 12 months, that can really affect them too. Like they really feel like they're not themselves. And so it can be really, really difficult to overcome. And that's where I think kind of the partnership with a really good physio or sport doctor is important. They're going to be there to be someone that you can lean on, who will provide you with those sort of objective standards. Like, we want you to get to this range of motion. We need you to be able to do this particular physical action. That gives you those targets, and that helps to give you something to focus on. But when you get back to the field, there's a whole different series of circumstances of how difficult it is and what you're kind of balancing emotionally. And I think kind of the one thing I'll say is, there are athletes, most athletes have some level of nervousness, anxiety, or outright fear. Because if you, let's say, blew up your knee, if you have like an ACL, MCL injury, you've been away from the sport for a long time. And the last time you played, you suffered a catastrophic event. And, all injuries are different, but very likely you felt the pop, you had maybe a high degree of pain, a high degree of swelling. Like that's terrifying. That is such a significant event of your life. And coming back to the sport, that fear, those emotions, they don't just disappear. And so when we work through our return to play, our late return to play with our athletes, there's a big element of just having to like ease yourself back in on the physical side and try to build trust in your own body again. Like to you're talking to your knee and going, okay, I trust you, knee. You've shown that you can jog. You've shown that you can jump. You've shown that you can do this. We need to start with baby steps on the field. Can you jump with even someone around you? Can you pivot with a mark on you? Like, these are completely different tasks and skills. And every time you challenge yourself further, it's possible or probable that you're going to deal with another layer of anxiety or nerves. And so there's this little voice in your head, maybe saying like, I don't know if it's going to be okay. I don't know if it's going to be okay. It takes time for that little voice to go away or that little voice to get quieter and quieter. It does happen. But you have to live with that for a period of time. And it's a real challenge for many athletes. And actually there's an athlete who reached out to me this past week, someone in front of her, basically they were in the stack, made a cut and crumpled and suspected significant knee injury. And it gave her like immediate, almost like a PTSD type symptom. Like that's what she wrote. She's like, I went right back to when I hurt myself 2 years ago, and I was almost reliving the moment. And, that night, the next day, she's like, I couldn't train. I stopped. Like, I just was not in the right mindset to continue on in this session. And she's been healthy for a long time, but it was right in front of her. It gave her that, put her right back in that moment of when she hurt herself. And so, it can last, unfortunately.
This whole thing that you just said gave me severe PTSD. So I don't know if you know this, but I used to play for Traffic in 2015 and 2016, I believe, and tore my ACL in my second year. And I haven't played Traffic since then. And it was everything you just said, like an identity. Like, I was coaching too. I could even demonstrate when I was coaching. So it affected my work too. And it just shattered all of my confidence. And I still think about it probably daily. And I think I tore it in 2016. Yeah. So it's been a long time, and I've been playing Club Ultimate for many years, and I even made Team Canada mix. So Masters, sorry. And yeah, I still think about it. So the psychology of it is really intense. And I do talk to my knee like it's a person, and I tell it it's a good girl and that it's strong. So that resonates with me. And I honestly didn't know as much about training, and I didn't know about mental recovery from injury until this. And I think I've been able to better support athletes that I'm coaching and I'm working with. And it's going to be something I'm doing with my research with my masters. So it's potentially meant to be, I don't know. I don't want to put that on myself to have gone through that for the greater good, but there's some gratefulness there. So yeah. Oh, ACLs, don't do it, people. Train properly. Listen to your coaches.
There you go. That's why we have Mike Haddock on. So
yeah, totally true. And okay, we're going to segue out of this because I need to stop thinking about it. You have worked with a lot of different teams and a lot of different athletes within Canada. So you have a really unique perspective. You've also worked within Ultimate Canada in different groups. So how do you view kind of where we're at Canada-wide teams organizationally and kind of looking into the future? Do you think we're positioning ourselves well? Do you think we're far behind? What do you think?
Oh, this question makes me very excited. I have such incredible belief in our Canadian Ultimate system. I do believe we are positioning ourselves to continue, the excellence of the years and years and decades of athletes who've come before us and teams who come before us. But I feel just so inspired by what I see on the horizon in Canadian Ultimate. And, what's interesting over the course of my career and kind of the last 5 years, working through different versions of Team Canada and getting to know athletes across Canada, I'm getting to know more people. I'm getting to see more of the infrastructure within Canadian Ultimate and seeing and witnessing the people who are really dedicating themselves to kind of pushing things further. And so like a lot of my history, a lot of my experience came from the athletes. And so right from the outset, like I know that we have the talent in this country to be the best in the world. Like indisputably, we do have the talent to win gold medals over and over again. At every level, like U20, U24, senior and above, like everything, we can do this. We have enough athletes to do that and enough extremely talented people who work really hard. So that was kind of the first piece of my puzzle. Like that is definitely there. Over the last couple of years specifically, I've gotten to meet more of the coaches and more of, let's say, the senior leadership within the greater sort of Canadian system. And as someone who kind of prides themselves on being, very organized and communicative and sort of thoughtful in what I do, I see so many experts in our system. And, from a coaching perspective, getting to work with Carla DiFilippo and Matt Berezin and seeing like what they bring to the table every day and how their athletes respect them and respond to them. I know we have and many other coaches outside of those two. They're at an exceptionally high level. Someone like Alex Davis, who, I think I'm busy. Davis is the busiest person I have ever met, but he is so exceptionally organized. He is so on top of his leadership kind of components, and seeing what he's trying to accomplish within Ultimate Canada. Like I see that every stage in the system, we are pushing the boundaries of what we're capable of. And we are looking to build for the future. We are trying to leave the organization and the teams and the athletes in a better place than where it was yesterday. So I see us continually adding 1%, 2%, 5%, 10% to everything we do. And it makes me really excited. And witnessing the expertise and professionalism and excellence of all the people I get to work with, it pushes me to want to, truly give my absolute 100%, because I don't want to let them down. I want to pull equally as hard as they are. And it's just, I think we're on the right path, and I really believe that we have what it takes.
I mean, Mike, we're going to listen to this podcast a few years from now, this episode specifically. And when Canada's on many podiums, we're going to mark this exact moment right here. So you heard it here first, folks, on the Huckin podcast. When we start winning some golds out there, you're going to remember this moment right now. So, last question here, Mike, for you. You set it out there, so we got to put it out in the universe, right? So
let's go.
You mentioned some projects you're working on with Ultimate Canada. Some interesting names. One of them being the DOG, the Data and Analytics Working Group. Kind of cool name. So can you talk a little bit about the sports science aspect that we're working on? There's a lot of different elements happening with Ultimate Canada, and this is one of them. So can you talk about that as kind of our final question here?
Yes. Well, this speaks to kind of some of those initiatives of trying to leave the organization in a better place. And, a ton of credit does go to Alex Davis in this, who has a vision for the organization and has helped to execute it on many levels. So the Data and Analytics Working Group, DOG, or what's sometimes known as the Dog House, is a committee through Ultimate Canada. And they are specific individuals who have applied and joined this committee, who are either interested in sports science or have worked within sort of the data management and analysis side. And so Davis has brought these individuals together to help kind of figure out where we might find some efficiencies and where we might be able to explore the science of Ultimate. And Davis and I have known each other for 5 years. He was an athlete in 2016 for WGC, and we got to know each other. And then we've maintained our relationship. And he was the assistant coach for Team Canada Men for WGC. And so once WGC was canceled, we were chatting about some of these initiatives. And one of the things I put forward was this idea of a needs analysis. And long story short, a needs analysis is basically an objective overview of the demands of the sport. And almost every sport, especially professional sport, elite sport, sport that has history, there's a needs analysis. And it's understanding through data, like, what do we expect the athletes to go through when they participate in this game at the highest level? And Ultimate does not have any or much sport time. Well, there has a little bit. There's some excellent data out there about sort of injuries, but there is nothing around game demands. And this has been something in the back of my head since I was in school. Like, Ultimate needs this. And our coaches, our experts, we have a good subjective idea of what our athletes go through, but there are no objective data points. And so when WGC was officially canceled, that's when Davis and I kind of sat down and said, like, let's try to take this forward and let's begin this project of UNAP, the Ultimate Needs Analysis Project. And over the last year, it's been an incredible initiative. We're still working through it, but we worked through a series of prototypes. We identified games that we wanted to evaluate. We trialed a few, and then we went through a review and verification process. And then through Ultimate Canada, we put out a call for volunteers. And I was overwhelmed at the response. And we have 18 volunteers from across North America who are currently working on this project with us that are not even a part of the dog group. So we have a series of volunteers through dog, and then we have a series of volunteers through UNAP. And they're doing the data. They are watching the games, they're following our structures and systems, and they are collecting all the data points. And so we're somewhere in the range of 80 or 90 games of data collected and reviewed and verified. And we're working with our data science team to start to answer some really key questions. And we're hopeful that this gives some really clear data for us to fall back on that just either helps to reinforce what we think we believe, or to maybe shatter some of the mythology that we've been blind to. And so I'm really excited about where this is going, and I'm really excited to be a part of this kind of next generation, and to hope to use this data to again support our Canadian national system and be one of the tiny avenues that take us to the top.
Yeah, I've worked with Davis too. We are doing a U24 prospect group in BC, and he's like narrowly and tirelessly focused on goals. And there's a lot of people that are like, I don't think we need that, or like, this is ultimate. What are you doing? Like, there's a lot of haters and naysayers, and he just drives forward until he finds the right people. And obviously you're the right person, and he gets people in our U24 group too. And we're collecting data and we're learning a lot, and it's going to help with funding. It's going to help professionalize our sport, professionalize our training. And yeah, he's really shown a lot of leadership. So I'm glad he's getting a lot of shout outs here for this. We can talk offline, but I really want to connect with you about the UNAP specifically, because as I said earlier, I'm doing my master's and I did not know that any of this existed, and I need this data. So let's connect.
There you go. I like it.
Thank you for helping me with my schoolwork. Yeah. So any last thoughts, words of wisdom before we sign off here, Mike?
Well, I think, we touched early on in our conversation just about some of the challenges of this year. And I just kind of want to reiterate, because I'm sure those who are listening are probably ultimate athletes who are starting to get back into the sport. And maybe where we started this conversation was very negative, very like, all right, here's the danger and doom and gloom of it all. I do want to reiterate that there is a positive side to this. Like, it's wonderful to be back to sport. But I think kind of the key theme that I hope kind of came through is listening to your body is a very, very important skill. And wherever it is that you're coming back, whether you trained a lot or didn't train at all, whether you're playing 1 day or 3 days a week, it's recognizing that you do need to listen to your body. And if it's telling you like, this is cranky, this is irritated, that's those early warning signs before a major injury occurs. Because if something's a little bit cranky, it's telling you that there's a disruption in the system. It's either been overworked or some muscle or some system's not doing its job. And if you listen to your body, if you really kind of build that skill, that's something that you're going to use for the entirety of your career, not just for this season. And I think that it's even more important this year because of what's happened in the last year and a half. And for many athletes, you might have to reframe what your goals of 2021 are. Like maybe maybe your goal is to get through the season healthy, like to enjoy being back in sport. Like, don't try to peak. Don't try to go back to where you were in 6 weeks or 3 months. Like, it might not be possible. And if whatever your season finishes in 2021, we're hopefully, knock on wood, going to get back to some normalcy, and you will hopefully have a normal off season. And 2022 can look regular again. And don't try to jam everything that you lost into a very short time frame. It's not going to be easy for the body. It's not probably going to go super well. Give yourself some time and know that it is okay that it takes time. We're all going through the same challenges. Everyone in the ultimate world lived through the same thing. So no one's all that ahead of you or all that behind you.
That's beautiful advice. I'm going to take it as I go to practice tonight. I'm going to listen to myself and my body. It's going to be amazing. So very timely. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. Mike, you're amazing. You're an incredible resource. Canada is lucky to have you. And if you are a subscriber to UltiWorld, you're going to be able to hear more from Mike. Also, we have Mike also joining us for Beaver Tales. It is a Mike show today. We're very excited. So stick around. We'll see you in our Beaver Tales segment. And yeah, thanks again, Mike.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
All beavers unite.
Welcome back. We're in the Beaver Tales segment now. We get to hear a story from Mike Haddock. Really excited about it. And Mike, you get to walk away with a pair of Huckin socks from our sponsor for this episode, Be Ultimate. So stoked for that. Let's go. But let's jump right into the story here. Let's hear your Beaver Tale for us. And we're just going to sit back and listen.
Well, I'm glad to hear I'm getting the BE swag. Like, they're the partners of HSB. They fully outfitted us, so I know how high quality their stuff is. So that's great to hear.
Hey.
A bonus perk that I didn't know was coming. Today in the Beaver Tale, I'm going to tell the origin story of HSB, kind of what really kind of set things off and how I arrived here today. And so we're going to take it back all the way to 2015. And I've been working with the Toronto Rush GOAT system for 2 years. And in the summer of 2015, GOAT won the Canadian National Championship for the first time in a Worlds qualifying year. So it was an epic showdown against Furious. GOAT managed to come away with it. And I actually didn't realize that the winning team, basically the leadership of that team, was going to help to dictate who the roster was for 2016 Open Worlds. So very early in that process, GOAT's coach, Scott Shooter Hasty, came up to me. We were working together on something else, and he's like, "Would you like to join Team Canada?" And I was like, 100%. This is my dream. Yes, I would. Let's do this right now. And so it was wonderful. But kind of where this ties in is I was starting to then build relationships with some of the athletes who weren't in Toronto. So one of the athletes in particular, Morgan Hibbert, if anyone knows Morgan, they know how dedicated he is to his development and his excellence on the field. And so he was one of the athletes who really jumped into the process early on. And so he was one of the very first athletes to reach out. He really committed himself to the process. He had already been doing so much, but we were able to work together very nicely and build a really strong relationship. So come Worlds, we're now kind of like power pools, quarterfinals day. We're just hanging out. I remember we were walking across the London fields, and he's like, "So, like Mike, what do you see happening for you after Worlds?" I was like, "Well, this was one of the best things I've ever done. I want to keep doing this." And I didn't truly appreciate sort of like the cycle of the ultimate schedule on a year-over-year basis. And I knew about the World Games, but I didn't really appreciate that World Games was truly the pinnacle of it all. And I was like, I think I might try to talk to someone at Ultimate Canada, maybe I'll do like World Games, blah, blah. And he's like, "Mike, you really should try to make this work. Like, whatever it is you need to do, you need to continue to be pushing yourself forward. Because this helped our team. This really helped me. And I think you can help more people." So he was a huge catalyst for that. But that was like a big part of my mind of now there's like, okay, this is real. This can be something. And so after the tournament, I went home and I started to work on a significant proposal for Ultimate Canada. It was, at the end, probably 50, 55 pages that I submitted to the organization with 3 primary pillars. I'm like, I can support the World Games team, the U24 team going to Australia, and I can help with some of your Sport Canada documentation to hopefully secure a piece of the national team funding pie that Sport Canada gives out. And this was like an early fall, after Worlds, and there was not hesitation by any means by Ultimate Canada, but they were just not sure yet. And so going back to Worlds, I remember talking to Kevin Underhill, and he was speaking about some of the things that happen on a yearly basis, and he talked about the Ultimate Canada Conference. And so I knew that my proposal was in their hands, but we didn't really have any clarity one way or another. I was like, I would happily come to the Ultimate Canada Conference. I can give a presentation about my process to, the key decision makers if you'd like. And I came back and said, we'd love this plan. We'd love for you to present. We've already filled all of our speaker spots, so there's no more funding. But if you want to come to Saskatoon, you're welcome to do so. So I was like, I got to make a choice. I've put like 150 hours into this proposal. I've come this far. This is what I want to do, professionally. So bought my plane ticket, took myself out to Saskatoon, presented basically like the first real morning. I thought I was presenting to a small group. It was like in an auditorium style. It turned out to be like 60 people. So like it was a big presentation, like mentally for me. But it went incredibly well. But the real kicker to this was I basically finished my presentation, and 10 seconds later, two of the members of the competition committee and like kind of the board directors, they walked up to me and said, "We are very excited to work with you. We are going to accept your proposal. Like, welcome to Ultimate Canada." And so I had no idea what to expect. I was certainly hoping for good news, but I never would have expected to come literally like a second after I finished. So that catapulted me into like essential like legitimacy within the Canadian Ultimate sphere, that like I'm committing to World Games. I'm committing to U24. I'm going to be working with all these teams, all these athletes within this organization. And that was the arc. That was where things took off. And I mean, you can go back to the beginning of the show and kind of talk about what I've done since. That, helped to build the legitimacy of, what I bring to the table. It helped to give me greater networks and greater connection and greater influence in the most positive sense of what I can do as an S&C coach. And kind of the rest is history. So it all came down to a big gamble on a presentation and a plane ride.
That is so great. And Theo and I were actually just talking about this, I don't know, like yesterday or something. And it says like, you don't get what you don't ask for. So really,
you got to advocate.
Yeah. You got to advocate for yourself. You put yourself out there, and sometimes you'll get shut down and sometimes you're going to get your dreams. So what a wonderful, wonderful message for everybody that's listening. So I love that story so much. Also, UCC is so fun. So big advocate for that conference.
I had no idea how fun it was, to be honest. As soon as the presentation was done, as soon as I was now like in full relaxation enjoyment mode, so I was able to just like kind of hang out and see the other presentation, see what's going on. It was definitely a fun weekend after that.
It's like party time. I don't know. Kevin Underhill, when I was going to present at a conference, he was like, "It'll be the best ultimate party you've ever gone to." And I was like, "What? It's a conference with like admin and coaches and stuff." Like that was really weird. And I came back home and I was like, "That was so fun. I'm going every year." So yeah. Good shout out to that. Thank you so much again, Mike, for being here, not only for our main segment, but also for sharing your story with how you got started with your company and reaching for your dreams. We will see you in the subscriber only section. So if you don't subscribe to UltiWorld, all of you that are listening, you should do that. Definitely lots of amazing content. I subscribe. I watched some sick videos last night on my TV of Ultimate that's being played right now. So if you are like Mike and want to be featured in our Beaver Tales, you can do that. You can submit your story online. You can also just DM us. Like we're pretty active on Instagram, and you can message us on Facebook too.
Yeah.
Just come be featured on the pod. You're going to win some awesome swag from one of our awesome suppliers in Canada. So yeah, let's say goodbye for now. We'll see you in the subscriber only section. Thanks again, Mike.
Oh, Beaver party tonight.
The Beaver Tales song. We do love it. Thanks, Ace Burpee out of Winnipeg, for the song, and we just thank you for allowing us to use it. We just love the song. So anyways, thanks for tuning in for this episode. Next week, we're going to do a Canada Cup preview from the AUDL. So we're going to have representatives from the Toronto Rush, Ottawa Outlaws, and Montreal Royale here to talk about their teams, talk a little trash. As we know, the first game is actually going to be Ottawa versus Toronto in Ottawa, July 24th. Yours truly is going to be commentating, so really excited for that. Excited for more Ultimate coming back. So that's the plug for next week. Make sure you tune in for that.
And speaking of plugging, got to plug the subscriber only section. UltiWorld is awesome. Subscribe, videos, bonus feature content, including ours. We have Mike Haddock, as we mentioned in the Beaver Tales. We asked some spicy questions. He's got some spicy answers. We love the spice. So also follow us on various social channels. We're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. Huckin A. You can find us. It's easy. Email us, huckinga@alltworld.com. I think that's right. If it's not, Theo will tell you the real one in all of our social media posts. So it's all good. Have a great day, everyone.
Hey, this is Becky Thompson from Iceni, Team Canada, and now Team GB, and you're listening to the Huckin A podcast, your coast-to-coast guide for all things Canadian Ultimate.